Hello, this is Frank Conkling, and this is Panda Consulting's ArcGIS workshop. For this workshop, what we're going to do is we're going to look at importing and adjusting control points in the ArcGIS Parcel Fabric. And this is a result of some requests for some of our Parcel Fabric clients. Just a quick reminder, the QR code in the lower right corner actually will go and take you to our website where you can find out who we are, what we do, why we do it. Panda Consulting is an ESRI business partner, and we are the first in the country to have received the parcel management specialty designation. We also have release ready and state and local. So please, if you have any questions or have anything you'd like to suggest that we cover in our workshops, please go ahead and get to our website and correspond with us. All right, so today what we're going to do is we're going to look at adjusting control points. And it turns out that there actually is a tool that allows you to do that. First, we're going to go and talk about a control point. What is it that defines a control point in the parcel fabric? And then we're going to look at the import parcel fabric points geoprocessing tool. And there's a couple methods in there you have to be aware of. One is the match points method. The other is the update and create options. And then you've got the update types. And then finally, we're going to look at, well, once you get these things adjusted, what happens? What do you have to start thinking about for your data? All right. So let's talk about this. So what is a control point? A control point in the parcel fabric is defined as a point that has the fixed shape equal to yes. All right. Meaning it's equal to one, but it's got coded to value domain against it. And if you look here, this is a fixed shape is equal to one or yes. That means that this is in fact symbolized as a control point. The other adjustments or the other components on here is that the adjustment constraint is when you do an adjustment, how is it going to be constrained? And there are several versions on how to go and do that. You can have the X and the Y constrained, but not the Z. You can have no constraints, or you can have the XYZ constrained. They have little effect on what happens with the adjustment, and that adjustment primarily is dealing with the least squares adjustment. And then the final one is preserve equals yes. Now, the preserve equals yes has to do with an attribute rule that's on here. Let's look at these control points here for a minute. So on here, again, what I've done is I've gone and separated and made a copy of the points feature class inside the parcel fabric. And I've actually put a definition query against this. And the definition query I have here is not, oh, I don't have one. Not that the fixed shape is equal to one, but I'm going to put in here that it's going to be preserved is equal to one, and I'll show you that why I do that here quickly. Or as I'm going through here, I'll describe. So in this, I've got just a data set that's set up specifically for this demo. And we can see in here that we actually have 8 control points defined in here. And they are fixed shape equals one, different adjustment constraints for the parcel fabric, and on our preserve is equal to yes. So again, there's a couple of places where those two things interact. Let's look at the attribute rules. Turns out that for points, there are two primary attribute rules that you want to go and deal with. The first one has to do with calculation rule, in which it says that if in fact, if in fact the fixed point is set to yes and it's empty, then in fact it can go and it will allow you to go and do that fix on here. But there's also a constraint rule in here that says that if the shape is set to be fixed, to go and not allow it to go and be moved at all. So this constraint rule stops you from moving a point where the shape is fixed, and that the calculation rule allows you to go and determine whether or not any of the attributes are preserved or whether this is preserved and symbolized as a control point. So just be aware there's those three things you want to think about when you have a set of points that you're going to go and update. The other thing we have here in this demo project is I've got a set of points. And if I look at this points, it basically has just a name field on here. And note I have different names on here than the control points. These are all marked as control points. And I said, instead, I want to put an attribute there that I know when it changes. It also has XY values on here, but it doesn't really have to have anything other than that. Doesn't need a global ID, doesn't need any of that. He just has to have the attribution and something that's close. All right, in order to go and be able to go and be implemented as part of these control points. So the import parcel fabric points geoprocessing tool has a couple of things you want to think about. One, what are the points layer or feature class that you're bringing in? Interestingly, it doesn't have to be a feature class. It could be a shapefile. It could be a comma delimited file. It could be a couple different types of files, but it just has to be points somehow. Then you want to go and identify that's here. You want to identify the parcel fabric that it's going to be brought into. Now, interestingly, this adjustment gets done against a record. So you want to identify a record that's going to be used. And then there's a couple settings here. There's the mask point method and the distance that you're going to be searching. How are you going to go and update these options? And what are you going to update once you go and do that? Let's look at this, the match point methods. How will you, when you bring these points in, how are you going to identify what has to be moved if it does get moved? And there's three options. One is proximity. If it's within a certain distance of a point that's going on, that other point, that other control point can be moved. It's the way that you match it. Another way is if in fact you have a specific name and the proximity, you can go and do that. Note you will have to have a proximity if you try to do um, a name proximity matching. The other way is if you have global IDs. Now, global IDs would mean that you take your points from your parcel fabric, export them out, and it will maintain the same global IDs. And then it also will look at proximity for that. So you first have to tell it, how is this thing going to match up together in order to go and bring it in? So those are the first things is how is it going to match? And then note all three of these require proximities. So let's go back here. So when we go to put this in place, and let's go and do this on here, we have proximity and we have to tell it what's the distance measurement and what type of a measurement is this going to be. By default, it goes in, I think it defaults to 1/10 of a meter. Again, you can change this to other things. Now, I can tell you, I've seen counties in which the new section corners are as much as 400 feet away from the existing ones. So just be aware that if in fact the search distance is a certain component on there, you want to be careful with that and make sure it's within that proximity. So you want to know where those control points are. In this case, if I look at what I've got, these are probably 20 or so feet. It's from away from where they are. All right, so I've got a couple different variations on this for this. So, it's just you want to know how far off these are. The next thing, that's the match points method. The next is how are you going to match these? How's it going to match and what's going to be created? So you have again three options. Once you set this all out, are you going to update the match and create unmatched? So what happens if there's nothing there? Are you going to create a new control point for that one that's not there? Are you only going to update the match ones or only create unmatched ones so you don't change the existing control points? You only create new ones that are brought in. Or are you only going to update those that match and not create new ones? Again, it's just another filter on how you're going to go and update this. Just sort of as an aside, often what will happen is a surveyor will be out and he'll be collecting new points and he'll be providing new coordinate values for those points. And they are completely unaware as far as what you've got in the parcel fabric. And they may be creating new points that you don't have, or they may be reassigning values in other points that you may or may not be aware of. So that's the other thing you want to watch out for is how are you going to go and do this on here? You're going to just update the matched and create the unmatched, just update the match or just create the new ones. Sorry, I had that backwards. Then you also have the ability to go and filter the targeted points in here. In this case, we could say that we're only going to target those points that are where it's um, fixed is equal to one or fixed is equal to yes, or whatever you can identify what it is. All right. And what you're going to go and work this against. Again, this is in a record, which means it has to be in a version. And then finally, what are you going to update? Are you going to update everything? The geometry and the attribution? Or are you going to update just the geometry on there? Or are you going to retire any existing ones, mark them as retired, and replace them with new ones? So these are the three options on here. You can either update the geometry and the attribution, just the geometry, or retire the existing ones and replace them with new values in here. So it's fairly straightforward. There's a lot of options, a lot of things you can do in here, but there's some interesting components to this. Again, obviously it has to be exactly the same coordinate system as what you've got your data stored in, and you want to be aware of what's coming in here. So that I've got this right here, and I can see, all right, I've got 20 feet. That's more than enough. And I wanted to update those matched and create ones that are not here right now and do this. Well, if I go and click run on this, what is going to go and run through here and give me response? What happened when I did this? And when I did this, it says, well, wait a minute. It did some of them, but it says some of the match points, 8 of them, as a matter of fact, their fixed shape field was set to yes, and they were not altered. To update these points, set it to no and rerun this tool. So it turns out that this tool only wants to go and edit and update and import those control points, those existing control points where the fixed is set to no on here. So you have to go and identify what points you want to go and update, and then you have to set them to no. You're not going to have fixed shape on here. Now, initially, I thought that maybe it was because of this preserve attribute rule. It might have been firing it off. So I actually went through and I disabled this rule. Didn't make a difference. It still gave me that same error. And then I thought, well, maybe the constraint rule was the issue also. I wouldn't disable that. It didn't make a difference. The tool still gave me this warning and saying it did not update anything because if the point is set to fixed shape is equal to yes, it will not move those control points on there, which is logical. But it just means, and you need to know this, that if you're going to use the import parcel fabric points tool, the points that you want to go and update and modify and move to these new points have to be set where the fixed shape is set to no, not to yes. So let's go back here and test this. And again, it's the reason why I went and set this up so I could identify these. I am editing right now. Here are all my points. So let's edit them all, select them all. Let's go over here and let's go ahead and change this. Instead of being yes, let's change that to no. All right. And again, it has different constraints on it, but these are all now set to no on here. All right. Now, when I do that and I go to run this again, same thing. Here's my record. Here's my proximity, 20 feet. go ahead and match and unmatched ones in here and run it. Now we'll go and run it, and it gives me green saying, yes, actually, these all updated successfully. This is where you want to be careful because now I've turned these off and said, no, these aren't control points anymore. I have to go back and set them to be control points again. So you want to be careful with that and just make sure that you've set that. In this case, what I would do is I would go in here and open this up. And again, I had set this so that instead of being a definition query against a fixed shape, I also used where it's definition query against preserves. Now I can go in here, go back to my attributes and reset this so that these are all yes now. All right. Now these are all yes. I can clear this. Now when I zoom into some of these points, I can see that it actually has gone and moved them. So they are coincident. So I can undo. I guess I've actually gone and made that already. So it has moved all of these to be completely consistent with that. All right. So it's an interesting thing I found was that when I did this, I have to make sure that those what were control points, I have to make sure that I set them to no. Or or I have to go back here and say instead of resetting them to no, tell it to retire my old points. Right? In that case, it would go ahead and retire them instead of replacing them on here. Will that work? Let me go and see. So if I go back here and I completely disable everything here, go back here and just verify these are control points in here. And let's see if this will work now. Again, here it is again. Now this time, instead of updating all, I'm going to say retire and replace these on here. Let's see if this works now. Looks like it works. What about here? Oh, here's my old control point. What do I have here? I have none here that are set to new. And was that because on this, I did not have a fixed point is equal to yes? Could very well be. So that perhaps what I really need to do is have a field in here that says these are new fixed points and go ahead and use those. Let's look and see what the attribution is for this new point in here. Here's the imported, here's the attribution, but it's set to be no. If I also go and look and say just go ahead and select this one, and I can say activate the record of that import and say select all of these points that are associated with it. I have the 8 points that I could go back now and just say, well, yeah, these are now control points. Is this one retired? This one here. Is this one retired? In fact, it is retired, but I don't have a definition query set against it. So it does show that it went and retired that. So perhaps I need to go and set up a one here that says it's not just a retired point, but it's a retired control point in here. All right. So there's nuances in here. It's not just as simple as saying, well, you go ahead and run this. You've got to recognize how things are going on. And again, how do I figure out what was part of this record so that I can capture them all and make them newly control points, if I don't have that field in my imported control points, first of all, the suggestion is have that field in there. Have it set to yes or one on there. That way you can have that automatically set up when you bring it in. Secondly, make sure you have a symbology set or something that's set where these points, again, let's look and see if there is none here. So let's go and see if we set up a definition query where the definition where the retired is null. That should means it should only show me my current. Oh, ah, let's turn this off. Okay. Now it's only showing me the current because I didn't have it on this second one I had here. So just be aware that the default setting and configuration is not optimized for bringing these things in, but there is some things you want to be concerned with. So it's not as simple as just saying, well, let's just bring them in. You've got to recognize, you've got to set up your structure for your imported files correctly, or you've got cleanup to do afterwards. The good thing is it's being done against a record. So you can always go and take that record and say, find everything that was created on this, everything that was affected by it. You also want to go and look to see, are you in fact going to be using this retire and replace? So it's another thing. Then the question is, well, what about if I have this, perhaps I need to start thinking about adjustments because yes, what happened, and especially it's obvious here in this line, it adjusted this corner and adjusted this corner. Well, what about the line in between there? What happened with that? Well, if I go and look by going to the quality and say, do a show me gaps and overlaps, sure enough, when it moved these things, it created gaps and overlaps. Now, I'm going to say just disregard all this because this is outside, but I now have gaps and overlaps in here. So let's look at a couple of ways you do that and fix this. The one thing and let's recognize this, if we go in here and zoom, the reality is it's going to move, it's going to use standard topology, it's going to move the line and the polygon that are connected to these points. And again, depends upon whether I have any breaks in there or not. It may bend the line here at this next vertex, or it may be a straight line between them. And either way, you're going to have to go back and look at making adjustments on there. So what type of adjustments? For the most part, you're going to be looking at doing things like aligned features. Again, aligned features, there's a couple things you want to make sure of. A, you want to deal with things like whether or not you have topology set. And I don't know whether I'm going to create any issues here or not, but we'll see. And then you want to go and figure out how big of a tolerance should you allow here. Make sure you set the method to fix the shapes to the path, not just snap the line endpoints. Snap the line endpoints, it would snap this and this, but do nothing in the middle. I wanted to go and take everything in the middle here. Let's make sure my snapping is set correctly. Let's make sure, again, it's up pretty far out here. There to there. Sorry. And if I look, it will be snapping those points together on here and even along here. This doesn't look bad. So let's go ahead and align this up. I do have a topology grapher, meaning that it's going to go and delete either a line or a point or something in there. So it's at this point where in using align features, I often will go and say, no topology on here. Let me go and draw these lines now and go from, let's make sure, okay. This is another issue. This is where, because it says that I cannot go and move that point, it's trying to go and move that point when I do align features against there. So you want to be aware of it. So there is this attribute rule here. This attribute rule says if my preserve is set to, actually I was receiving this attribute rule, the constraint here where the shape is set to fixed, don't let me adjust it, don't let me move it. Even though it's the endpoints, it's still being included inside of here. I often will have to say, let's go ahead and save my edits, save this disabled point, and then go back and attempt to go and realign this again. No, maybe it's this other rule. It says preserve it. Oh, actually, this is a different error. This is one in which I've got a rule that says on here. I actually have a rule here, sorry. It's looking for a layer that's not in here anymore. All right, let's see if I could do this now. Now it went and aligned them. These are now lined up. So again, I can go and say, well, show me in highlight areas here. Again, there's another one here. Well, this is inside of a PLSS. Let's go and make sure. Let's go and say here to here. And let's have it recheck this. Cleared that up. Now, this is a public land survey system area in which we're actually dealing with, this is a section of land and it's breaking down. In reality, the intersection or center of section here should be defined as being a straight line from the north quarter corner to the south quarter corner, the west quarter corner to the east quarter corner. And if I go and draw a line here and here, I can see, in fact, that's not where that quarter corner is. And that again, from a surveying standpoint, it might be that that's the way this section was broken down by the original monuments. I have to deal with it. It doesn't always mean it has to match. But that doesn't prevent me from going and cleaning up and making sure I correct the actual overlaps that I have here. So I can go in here and say, snap to here, Fix that one. Then come over and snap from here to here. Fix that one. And I'm going to do one more thing here, just to, and again, it's as a surveyor, I tend to focus on edge cases, things that don't work the way they're supposed to, things that are outside what it's supposed to be. And I want to make sure I remind everyone that currently the parcel fabric uses topology to get things together. Well, I have here a parcel, and let's go ahead and turn on our labels here. This originally was an aliquot breakdown, exactly 1,000 feet north to south along this line. And originally, when I did this, because this is not exactly perpendicular to this line, it's 1,000.22 feet. But because this corner moved up here, it does not necessarily mean that it actually went and changed this. So you look, and it actually, that came out to 1,010. So just be aware when you're bringing in control points in, it's going to impact the geometry of the data that you're dealing with, and it's going to go and make changes on here. Does that mean that that's a correct change or that it's something that you don't have to look into further? No, it means you need to recognize that it is going to change that geometry as you're moving forward. All right, I have covered, I believe, all of the slides I have here. Just remember when you use align features, you're going to recognize that things like topology graphs, if in fact points or lines are going to be disappearing, you'll want to go and do this. I see I've got a question here. Will all the features in between these control points also be adjusted proportionally? And again, that's the answer to that question. No, they do not get adjusted proportionally. The only thing that literally got adjusted here was the location of those 8 corners that I brought in. So in one sense, it actually stretched this distance between these 2 corners by 10 feet because that's a difference that this was off here. And it did not proportionally adjust this as I went through. Could one use a least squares adjustment on this? They could, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's going to correct out to exactly 1,000 feet like it should have been. Um, would you ever use the editing tool transform to perform this work instead? Transform is tricky, and the answer is no, because this would not be, in fact, controlled on here. The transform tool, just to show you, um, uh, on here, the transform tool is actually under the adjustment here. And it actually works in which you go and you tell it a select. Actually, yes, you do need a select parcel. You do have to go and change a parcel. And then you have to tell it the links as far as where these points get changed. So you have to go from one point to another point. All right, change, save to there. And then you have to go through and for each of these, define what that change was to go and move those points. So if I go and say, go ahead and do that, in this case, I only have, let's go and create another point here just to demonstrate how this works. And it will go and move those things in here. And this was an affine transformation. None of it was controlled. I hadn't turned the topology off. Just to go and talk about this, let's move topology back on and do an affine transformation. It still will make it. So the answer is no, I would not do that at all on here. It would just not actually create these or adjust these in any way that's meaningful or any way that would go according to the way this is working. So what we did here is we talked about just bringing points in. Bringing points is easy, but then you have to start thinking about what the unseen consequences of those are. How is your data set up at the moment? The biggest challenge is always that fixed point is equal to yes. How are we going to go and handle that when we bring these points in? Are you going to add that field to the points that you're bringing in? And then how are you going to control this against the points you already have? Because the geoprocessing tool already says if it has a fixed point equals yes, it's not going to go and work. So you have to go and make those adjustments on here. You have to identify which points you want to adjust, unless you do the retire and replace, in which case it will retire that and move it. If you're going to do that, make sure you set a definition query to somehow symbolize the retired points from the new points on here. So again, it's these ripple effects. You want to make sure that you understand how it's going all the way down. Each of these settings have different implications on here. You will see, at least in here, if I go and look at the attribute table again for these points. Well, actually, I turned them off. It actually had updated. Well, there it is. It's updated all of my imported points because originally they were marked as control points. Updated those. It went and updated all of the attributes on here. That was great, but just recognize that it also made changes to your geometries, and that doesn't mean you can stop there. You have to start thinking about where's our gaps, where's our overlaps, because as you move a point, it means it moves the things that are connected to it. It doesn't mean it moves everything. So, any questions? I forgot to say in the beginning, go ahead and put them over in the chat window, and I'll kind of hold it there. Are there any questions about this? Um, if you want, you can hold them after we finish the recording. Any questions or comments?
Nothing in the chat.
Thank you, sir. Let's go ahead and stop the recording.